Paul, could Sony have handled this any worse?
I don't know. This is just an extraordinary situation here. It's unprecedented. I think the issue in the short term, I would argue they probably made the right decision. This is not a tentpole franchise movie for them. So I think the risk-reward of trying to show this movie in the upcoming holiday season, the risk there is probably too much for a movie that, again, is not a make-or-break situation for the studio. Longer term, it really raises a question of, is this a precedent that future films could be held hostage here by any party? So, short term, it was probably the right decision. Longer term, it really sets potentially a very bad precedent.
In that industry, Paul, do studios run a reputational risk, or do consumers even know or care what studio made what movie?
Yeah, they really don't care who made what studio, what studio made what movie. I think it's, I think for Sony, it's really an issue of, is it a reputational risk for the talent in Hollywood, the producers, the directors, the writers? Will Sony stand behind a movie? Also, they have the relationship with their theater partners, the theater owners. And here, I think Sony, really worked with their theater partners and said, listen, the theaters clearly were not comfortable showing this movie. And so I think they kind of tried to work with their partners here. But they do run the risk of perhaps getting a reputation in Hollywood that they would not stand behind their film. But again, I think this was such a unique situation that I think everybody's going to give Sony a pass here.
I spoke with Seth Willinson, who's an industry consultant. He's got 40 years experience in Hollywood, and he was saying theater operators are like a utility business. They're more real estate operators than anything else. They're very cautious by nature. It's easy for them to drop a movie. Just move the 4 screens to another movie. You don't have to play this one.
I mean,
so it's an easy call for them.
I understand what the theaters wanted to do. I'm having a harder time giving Sony a pass, but more for a First Amendment reason than possibly a business decision. Leslie, you wanted to jump in here.
And to your point, is there another way they can distribute this film so that the public can actually see it, be it online streaming or on demand? Is that even a viable option for them?
Yeah, I think, a lot of folks in the industry are saying, hey, this might actually, the silver lining here might be Sony might have an opportunity to release via an over-the-top online video services such as a Netflix. This might be a test case for Sony to perhaps, launch a full, big studio film directly via Netflix or some other Amazon Prime or something like that. If for nothing else, to gauge how that market would react. Would that be a viable business model for future theatrical films that go direct to consumers over the internet? So, the silver lining here might be that Sony might have an option here to go direct to consumers with this film, because again, I'm not really clear that this film can live in the home video market.
Right.
Would a Walmart want to put this movie in its stores?
Okay, my morning West read is from Michael Moore, the filmmaker best known perhaps for Fahrenheit 9/11. All of Hollywood was tweeting last night after the news of Sony pulling the movie. He tweeted, "Dear Sony hackers, now that you run Hollywood, I'd also like less romantic comedies, fewer Michael Bay movies, and no more Transformers." This was retweeted, by the way, 15,000 times and favorited 11,000 times. Paul Sweeney, the movie business is not exactly filled with creative, cutting-edge executives, at least the guys who have to greenlight movies. We know that they've been more and more cautious over the years. Does this discourage risk-taking in Hollywood?
Yeah, I think this could clearly be the risk here. Hollywood over the last, really over the last 10 years has really veered much more towards the franchise movies, the comic book movies. And the greatest example would be Marvel Studios, owned by Disney. They've had a tremendous track record of releasing all those Marvel characters and just box office hit after box office hit. It's more difficult to get a, kind of a one-off movie kind of greenlit in Hollywood. And this might, make it even more difficult. But clearly, this was a very risky film to begin with. It's a political film. It's a, North Korea. So this was very much a one-off, high-risk film to begin with. Sony even acknowledged that. So, I think, that might, on the margin, be a little bit of a damper for Hollywood for new ideas.